There is a form of secondary gaslighting and invalidation that is incredibly painful, and it comes from society, professionals, friends, and family, people who are meant to help support us on our journey of healing. And not only does this secondary gaslighting from other people further isolate a survivor, it actually hinders, not surprisingly, the healing process. And I can't tell you the number of times that a survivor has reached out to me to tell me the painful effects of being invalidated by a friend, a family member, a spiritual leader, or even a therapist who dispensed ill-informed and sometimes victim-blaming ideas. This also contributes to the global gaslighting effect, in which speaking out about abuse from covert manipulators is met with some form of backlash, victim blaming and victim shaming by enablers of abuse and abusers themselves. And in this secondary gaslighting, it's incredibly traumatic to the survival. And it's not that your reality is just canceled, it's that your perception of reality is overwritten. And it's not necessarily the loudest and the scariest explosions that cause the most damage. And it wasn't necessarily the physical violence or the verbal abuse or the lack of boundaries and inappropriate behavior that all of these they form this type of abuse. And the real heavy damage that is done is the denial that the incidents ever occurred. The erasure of the abuse, I believe, can be worse than the abuse itself. It is important to learn the appropriate ways of communicating with survivors of malignant narcissists, those who lack empathy, who exploit others for their own gain, and who abuse chronically, and who lack remorse or conscience for their actions. So here are some common mistakes that people make when communicating with survivors of this type of insidious violence. They treat the abuse as a compatibility issue, a bad breakup, or a minimizing the pathological behavior of the abuser, while just saying that they equate it to that of a garden variety asshole or a jerk. And what we need to understand here is that malignant narcissism, any form of narcissism, is not just your everyday problem. And while narcissism does exist on a spectrum, many of those survivors who are reeling from the trauma of the emotional abuse have encountered many individuals on the extreme end of the spectrum. They have met predatory individuals who have systematically stripped them of their self-worth, their confidence, and their reality. And victims of malignant narcissists often undergo emotional, physiological, spiritual, financial, and sometimes even sexual or physical abuse. Someone who is a malignant narcissist has characteristics that go beyond selfishness, self-centeredness, and vanity, and they have antisocial traits such as a lack of remorse, aggression, and a lack of conscience. And this is somebody who can engage in an inhumane cruelty, these acts that are both psychological and physical violence, just to get their needs met, just to get off on something, and oftentimes just to humor them. And the narcissistic sociopath, they are an abuser, not just a cheater, a player, a difficult individual, and you cannot approach them as such. They tend to be chronically abusive, manipulative, deceptive, ruthless in their mind games, and they can even escalate into horrific acts of violence, and then unwilling to receive the unresponsive they're unresponsive to treatment. The malignant narcissist, they are someone who is hardwired with these behavioral patterns that cause irreparable harm to others. And whether you are a therapist, an advocate, a part of law enforcement, a family member, a friend of a survivor, be wary of giving out advice or counsel that would apply to garden variety toxic people. For example, sometimes direct communication or assertiveness can actually enrage an abuser and give them information these manipulators can use as ammunition. And survivors need strategies which are tailored to the dangerous aspects of exiting a relationship like this. And the same advice that you would give to someone dealing with an empathic person does not apply to someone who is empathy impaired and intentionally and sadistically posing harm to this human being. So sometimes there are people, things, the survivor themselves, they can interrupt the key features of the healing process by trying to get the healing to move along more quickly. And while every single healing journey is absolutely unique. Abuse survivors, they have many similarities across the board because these similar manipulation tactics are being used. And a survivor of habitual gaslighting by an abuser is suffering from the extreme effects of cognitive dissonance. They are trying to reconcile their abuser's false image, which hooked them in initially with the abuser's true callous, cold self. And as a result of this, survivors tend to ruminate over the incidents of abuse, as well as the initial love bombing stage they received from their abuser in the beginning. And baffled onlookers from counselors, friends, family members, and they may assume that the survivor is stuck and that they can't move forward because they keep ruminating over these events, these incidents of abuse. And what they fail to understand is that the rumination and the overanalysis are effects of the trauma that they experienced. And survivors of any form of abuse are often attempting to sift through their thoughts, their feelings, and their memories that have caused them this cognitive dissonance. And that is why we tell our story over and over and over again, because we're attempting to provide a coherent narrative to the trauma that we have just experienced. And this narrative, it allows us to overcome cognitive dissonance and disassociation, including the disconnect between thoughts, memories, and emotions that we have experienced as a result of the abuse. Cognitive dissonance is diffused and reduced when the survivor of narcissistic abuse is able to receive validation and confirmation of the reality that is of his or her circumstances. And to interrupt the process of rumination in a way that is judgmental and invalidating is especially harmful to a survivor of abuse who is just trying to figure out what the hell has just happened to them. And while you can certainly provide tips on healthier alternatives to kind of remove excess rumination, do not judge the rumination or the talking about the story over and over again, as this is a very normal part of the journey to healing. And a healthy way to interrupt in rumination may be to ask the survivor what they can do to better reconnect with the reality of the abuse that they have experienced, and guide them to reconcile their cognitive dissonance by acknowledging their abuser's disordered nature and their disordered tactics. This will absolutely help to decrease the gaslighting effect. My name is Sara Ann Brown, and this is Narcissistic Abuse 101. Hey guys, if you would like to donate to my cause, Narcissistic Abuse 101, click the PayPal link in my bio. And to those of you who have already donated, thank you guys so much.